hey, like, you might, I like asking the question, but you might be able to skip and just be like, hey, I was coming here tonight, and, like, I'm just a hat guy. I always wear a hat, so I was trying to figure out what hat to wear. And I've got, like, my two go-to hats, right? And so, like, I picked this one or that one. And then, the next night I was going out somewhere, and, I was trying to figure out what to do. And so I just got so frustrated, I ripped apart my hats. And I put it back together, and, I went out, and I had, like, a much more different options. But that kind of sucked because it didn't really stay together well or didn't look right or whatever. And so I tinkered with it, and then I came up with this way to attach them, and now I've got two built, right? And it gives you all these different options and then show how it works. But, sorry, now I've got two built. Yeah, see, I fell apart of it too. And then instead, not in this how it's worked. And so now, and then you just, again, you tell the story. So tonight, maybe you tell the story of like the last time you did something at the beginning. And like, so tonight I was coming over and I thought I was going to wear my head this way. But then I decided, actually, I'd really prefer to have the green on top. And so I flipped it over, and you take it out and you flip it over, right? And you just do the whole thing as a story. Like, and just rather than saying we have this many combinations, you kind of say like, so I tried it this way, but then I realized I could try it this way, or I could try it this way, like, I don't know, we just make the more of it that's the story, the better. Awesome. You want to say anything?
Sure. I mean, automatically top 10% because you have a working prototype, which puts you ahead of everybody else. That's awesome. Do you have a website set up yet?
Yes. It's website, Instagram is twobill.co. You can go check it out.
Definitely want to pitch that one. And that puts you far ahead because at that point then you can talk about traction already, like how many people are into it, like how quickly it's getting adoption. You can start viral marketing it. You have a working product in hand, and that puts you so far above everybody else. So very cool.
Thank you.
All right, great job. Thanks for coming. I already gave Brian the notice that he has to cough up $100 for the best pitch. So someone will get $100 in the end, and I think pizza is on the way. Awesome, can't wait.
Hello everyone, I'm Ivy. I'm currently a computational biology major. I'm a junior, so hectic times. So a few weeks ago, I was able to catch a little break, and my friends and I, we really wanted to have a cook night. And we're really craving this one dish, chicken tikka masala. So we got together, we got our chicken, tomato, yogurt, everything, and we pulled out the recipe, and we realized we're missing 8 out of the 10 spices that's needed for the dish. Coriander, turmeric, cardamom, and we're not gonna buy all the spices all at once, and it's just such a hassle to work with so many different bottles. And as I talked to more people, I realized I was not alone in this issue. Have you ever been on an internship or travel somewhere that you have to stay somewhere short term, and all you had was some salt and pepper, or not even? So here is the solution that I came up with. Spiceable spice cards. So this is inspired by medicine blister packaging. All different spices that you would need for this one dish is all selected and sealed in the medicine blister bubbles that are ready to be popped out into your pot. And last weekend, I built a little MVP with cold seal medicine packaging blister cards. So basically, all these different bubbles will be filled with the spices that you would need for this dish. And all you gotta do is just to pop it out. So I offered this to my friend again. We got together, and all we had to do was just to follow the instructions on the back and pop everything out of the card. It was such a meaningful experience. We were able to recreate that chicken tikka masala dish with a fraction of the cost, and we recreated the flavor. It was really nice, and it tasted just as good as the takeouts, maybe even better. And it was such a meaningful experience, being able to cook the dish with my friend instead of just ordering takeout. So Spiceable Spice Cards with 3 main features: convenience, affordability, and authenticity. It takes the guesswork out of cooking and makes sure every single dish you make is with the best flavor while taking the least amount of time. So make home cooking easier, tastier, and healthier, one spice card at a time. Thank you.
Very cool. So we're 2 for 2 on working prototypes. That's awesome. I think one of the things you want to pitch with this is sort of value proposition, and you kind of got to it at the end, but some of that was implicit. So I would do things like talk about expiration dates. If you buy like a lot of them in a normal McCormick, like you're going to be throwing most of it out anyway, and you know that, right? But if you have this, then you're good to go for your dishes, and you don't care about expiration because you've just got them basically one and done. Mm-hmm. It's very cool.
Thank you.
Great progress. Keeps getting better every week. As long as you keep doing that, you're gonna be really good. And so I love hey, now I went from just the card to the I've got the blister packs. That's an MVP. Like, you can use that.
Yeah, stores.
Yeah, I mean, I could see you going to Whole Foods or HEB or Blue, whatever the Royal Blue grocery stores, and maybe as another way to test it, go in and be like, okay, I've got 10 of these things for chicken marsala or whatever. I'm gonna go in and get all the other ingredients that you need, the chicken and other stuff for someone coming in, and let me hold up my little sign. I'm not gonna charge anything for this, but I'm gonna sell all the other stuff that you need. Like, it's like, here's your complete dish. Buy this, and here's all the chicken and the other stuff that goes with it, and you've got your turnkey dinner. And help me test it, right, and get feedback. And through that, maybe get some people to use it and see if it actually, they might be like, oh, actually, you're helping me sell more stuff. And maybe they like it, from that perspective too. But it's just, but most importantly, just a way to get it in front of people and get more feedback at that next step. But this is like super impressed, really great progress.
Thank you so much.
Awesome.
Hey guys, I'm Ronnie Weaver. I'm a fourth-year finance major. I run Texas Momentum, which is a organization here on campus. Thing is, we have no money, but we have this Slack channel with over 700 people in it, and I feel that it is very valuable because it's full of young entrepreneurs, very hungry, want to work on something. So I looked into ways that we can monetize this channel in some capacity, and I found this website called Seedlink, which is a job board and a Slack bot. And it says that if you install the Slack bot in your channel and someone finds a job from one of the postings it shares, you'll make $200 as a student organization. So I'm like, yeah, I installed this Slack bot on our channel, and within the next day, I start to see the first postings come in, and they're all very relevant to what we do in our organization. They don't seem like they're marketing or scammy. They're very aligned with our interests as a student entrepreneurship organization. By the end of the week, we have the first 3 people find a job, and we make $600. By the end of the semester, we make enough money to passively cover for the entire cost of the organization. I talked with other friends of mine that are leaders in student organizations, and they are very excited to get this Slack bot on their channel to passively make money in a single click. If you want to help turn this pitch into a reality, I'm looking for people that can do Slack bot coding. I don't know how to do that. And I've already got the customers. We have our first 2 already. Thank you very much. I'm Ronnie Weaver. Please talk to me.
Thank you. Very cool idea. Definitely sounds like it scales easily. Next step is probably building that prototype. So does the Slack bot you talked about already, does it already exist, or it's just theoretical?
No, MVP is just inviting them into the channels, and they pay $500 per head that they hire, the employers.
And so how are they talking to it just directly right now? How is it working?
Yeah, right now it's just directly trying to find organizations that are okay with job postings and employers that have positions and negotiating a certain cost per head. But eventually we'll be an automated system where you can just go onto a website, upload your job posting, and that's all filtered out for the organizations that are interested in that.
Very cool, very cool. Next step might be finding technical co-founder to start to build that. Because it sounds like you've got, from my point of view, I'm a technical guy, the harder part, which is thinking about the market, how it fits, and a pretty cool product design.
Thank you.
Yeah, that was super cool. Great pitch. Really, really well done. Obviously, we're prepared and practiced, and the whole thing was a story. It was great. I thought it was great how you just talked about the future like it was the present, and like here's what it is, and then you're like, okay, that's what I'm gonna make. I don't think it was misleading. I don't think you were trying to be misleading. You don't want him to ask that question at the end though. So you want to be a little more clear of like, actually, I haven't built it yet, but imagine if that were true, and then it's totally okay, right? But like, just you don't want anyone to feel confused at the end, and I'm sure that's not what you're trying to do. So, but really, really good job. Sounds really interesting, and also great that you had an ask at the end. It would seem like since you're part of Momentum, you should be able to find the people to go build it, but still good to have an ask. And yeah, great job.
Thank you. Don't need to be specific about price yet. You can keep the price open-ended until later, because people will find reasons to say no, and if they're going to get like hung up on that, don't let them yet, because obviously it's the easiest thing to change right now before you start. Right?
Yeah. Which might apply more to the $500 price to the employer. I think the carrot to the student orgs of like, you can make $200 a week is like, that was good. Like, I bet they like that. Yeah.
Just making sure this works. Okay. So. Michael Jordan goes for the dunk. And he makes it. Amazing shot. All right, we got Messi on the field, approaching the goal quickly. Okay. Wasn't expecting anyone to rush the field, but okay, cool. All right, but now I want you to imagine standing here. There's a gap on the wall. Now I want you to think, which of the three scenarios could you imagine, like, the shoe perfectly made just for that sport? Maybe one, two of them? But that last one, parkour. Can you, like, think of a parkour shoe? Many of you probably can't. I mean, I don't think anyone's really taken the time to make, like, a shoe as iconic as an Air Jordan or, like, an Adidas soccer cleat specifically for parkour. And it's a sport which, I would argue, it's like widely accessible, but it takes a lot more like mental preparation and sorry, let me not say that, but there's a lot more at stake. I mean, your life, you're risking your life just for like maybe like one gap, like risking a broken neck. And again, it's anyone can do this, from like the youngest child to like even I've seen like 40-year-olds do this, 50-year-olds. So. Shit. And like, shit. Can I look? Of course. Yeah, sorry. Okay. Yeah. So I want to design a parkour shoe that's made, that's tailor-made to resist all the wear and tear, all those broken, hopefully not broken, but like, look, hurt shins, scraped ankles, scraped elbows, to be there for, to really like redefine the soul of parkour. Yeah, I'll have to work on it for next week, but awesome. Yeah.
All right, no, it's a good job. You've been working on it, and there's a ton of energy that went into that. You got everybody's attention at the beginning. Now the next step is just kind of like pulling the story all together so that it flows, and so it's easy to remember and it's easy to tell. I think if I were maybe rewriting it a little bit, I thought the beginning part was interesting, but it was a little distracting at the same time too, because you really, when you talk about those other sports, you just make me also think about how they're a much bigger market. So, I think the market thing is probably one of the first things you need to just overcome, because people probably just aren't familiar with it. So saying something about how many people here have heard, do parkour or know somebody that does, or something like that, right? And then I don't know how many you're expecting to see, but then basically say give some stat of actually, just so you know, you might not realize this is how popular it is, or how fast it's growing, or how many people there are, something about how big the market is that makes it relevant. And then the story is something along the lines of, so I've been doing a bunch and learning, and trying different things. And the other day I was doing it, and I had, my basketball shoes on, but the basketball shoes weren't flexible enough, and so then I sprained my ankle, right? And then at that time I tried these soccer shoes, and I was doing that, and the soccer shoes, but they didn't have enough protection, and then I totally broke my toe, and blah blah. And so and I looked around, and I wanted to get just the best shoes for parkour, and there were Air Jordans for basketball, and there were Messi shoes for soccer, but there was just nothing for parkour. And I couldn't believe that with what a big market is that I told you about before, and how how important this is to making it successful, that there wasn't one of those. And so I made this shoe. And yesterday when I did parkour, here's how it was so much better, and why it's all the different ways that talk about doing parkour or something like that.
Very cool idea. Note of encouragement I would give you is just that clearly you parkour then, and you remember the first time you were doing it, the kind of feeling you felt in the pit of your stomach the first time you did something risky and it was like not normal yet, and then after a while that feeling just goes away, right? So it's the same thing with pitching, where you should think of it as don't feel bad at all about getting flustered in your pitches, and you just get it through reps. It's just like with parkour, where not that I know parkour obviously, but I've done lots of pitching, and the first 10 times I did it, I was just my heart was up here, and then without having to do anything or prepare, just you get used to it, and it comes down as normal, and it just feels totally normal. So just think of that as working out and getting the reps. And it's just it's like the rite of passage you have to do with pitching is do your first couple and get comfortable. So, no worries.
All right, it's great that you're here.
Thank you.
All right, Nick, do we have any more?
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Sharon Kaya, and similar to all of you guys, last summer I was applying to so many internships. And finally, I got the email that I was looking for. Congratulations. I was ecstatic. I was so excited that I finally landed an internship in this brand new city so far away. Then I realized I just landed an internship in a brand new city so far away. I knew no one there, had no friends, and was going miles away from home, hundreds of miles away from home, to a city I had no contacts in. So I immediately jumped on housing websites and started scouring these pages looking for some place to live for these 3 months I would be interning. And all these options were so expensive because they were subleasing from other people and they were giving it to me for almost $2,000 per month. Finally, I found a spot, chose it, and I realized it was far away from my company, but I dealt with it. And when I moved in, I realized my roommate was a 35-year-old man who only worked night shifts. He was a great guy, but we had no chance of being friends, no chance of bonding, as when I came home from work, he would be leaving to work. This made it really difficult. So when I went to work, I was talking to another intern friend, and he told me that him and his roommate were the best of friends. They met just a couple weeks ago, but everything matched. I asked him, was it just luck? How'd you meet this guy? He told me he downloaded this app and website called Internest. Internest helps you find housing, roommates, and things to do in these brand new cities in order to have it welcoming to this place where you don't know one at. He told me that all he had to do was fill out a short little questionnaire regarding his housing options, his choices, and his personality. And Internest automatically matched him to other people that were similar to him and gave him options of housing in the nearby area. It makes it a lot easier for students who are interning to find these brand new places, to find brand new friends, and have a support system in these brand new cities. And the best thing about it, it is 100% free to all students. If you just search up internest.com online right now, you'll see that you can access all of this completely for free. The way we get our money is by giving companies a way to incorporate Internest into their function to give it to their interns and making it a lot easier for interns worldwide to get roommates, housing, and activities in the area. Thank you guys so much.
Does internest.com really work?
Yeah.
Internest.
Internest.com. 2 N's, yeah.
2 N's.
It's like intern and then nest.
Got it. All right. Keeps getting better. Story was really good. Really good. And then you dropped out at so here's what it lets you do. And you could have just stayed in the story with this was his experience, and it would have been even better. But it was super solid.
I mean, that was fantastic. Clearly well rehearsed. Great notes. If you already got the website, you're all set.
Yep.
No notes.
Thank you, yes.
All right, cool.
How's it going, everyone? So my name is Dennis. I'm a second year studying statistics. Just to get some audience participation, give me a raise of hands if you ever did a competition for startups. Okay. Okay, that's a pretty decent number of those. I did that a while back too. And me and my team got the startup, we built the MVP, we got some feedback from the people in the competition thinking, oh, it's a great idea. But to really prove any concept, we try to get our first customers. And that's where the issue is. So we had this great idea, we had the MVP, but we had an audience map and who our ideal audience might be, but did not know where to find it. So I went on scouring the internet, trying to find different podcasts, email lists, different people who our ideal customers might listen to. And I spent way too much time, and the competition ended. After a bit of all this research, we put in the work, we got only one customer. Great and all, I thought it was a win. My team thought it was a win, not the judges. So we did not place, we did not get in the top 3, and slowly the people, co-founders lost interest, and everything kind of fizzled out. But a couple weeks ago, talking to one of you guys people in here, I came back with the same idea. They approached me and said, hey, I have this idea, and I'm struggling to find a market for it. So incorporating the same kind of finding all the data, finding all the people on the internet that might have this ideal customer, I gave them the napkin sketch, and I sent them off the way. Weeks, nothing go by. 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 5 weeks, they came back. Hey, it worked. Got 30 paying customers. A couple weeks more, we come back. Hey, 100, 120. Hey, it works. So, with this in mind, with this sort of strategy, I've realized what this kind of data that gives you. So with this strategy in mind, with this data in mind, I created Pond Finder. That's it. Thank you very much.
We gotta work on this clap, guys.
I'm a bit lost about what the product is at the end of the day. I get the story is very cool. Can I ask a bit about like what?
Yes. So it is a search sort of website where you get to put in what kind of your ideal customer is, and it scrapes the internet and gives you possible locations of like where you can find like Instagram, podcast, smaller influencers, maybe the books to listen to, that sort of stuff. Sort of like a little different locations where you can go and market to your ideal customers.
I see. And so is that like what's it scraping, or is it a lookup table, or?
Can you repeat that?
Is it like a lookup table, or is it doing some ML? How's it pairing up?
Data brokers and internet. And it just is scraping the internet off of different sites.
Okay, so there's demographic information, and then you're saying this is the demographic I want. Where do I reach them?
Yes, pretty
That's
much.
pretty cool.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. I'm glad you got up to pitch. I think you should keep working on this. I've worked with a lot of data and advertising businesses. What I heard in it was, I think I know what kind of customer I want to reach. What are not like give me their information, but what are the channels I need to use to reach them? Where do I find these people? How are other people finding people like that? And that seems like a question a lot of people would be asking. I don't know how hard it is to answer that question. I don't know if you've already built this, if it already works, if it's just an idea. That sounds to me like a hard problem, like to make really work reliably and high quality. But it sounds like that's good. Like hard problems are good, because I think actually if you can answer that question, I think a lot of people would probably want to know that. So, good job.
Yeah, definitely sounds very valuable. I mean, the only note I have on the pitch is you do want to storytell, but you also want to don't leave people like if there's a question in the mind of everyone hearing it for the first time, figure out what that question is and be sure you answer it in the first couple of moments. Work it into the story.
Yeah. I mean, building on that too, just for everybody, the story is great, and if you can do the whole thing as just a story, that's awesome. It's okay to say at the beginning, like, here's what I'm about to tell you about. Like, I'm building this and it does this. So let me tell you the story. And then people aren't like wondering the whole time what's going on. So, one more.
Hello. So I have a couple of questions from each of you. How many of you had used Power BI, Tableau, any kind of intelligence dashboards? Sure. But how many of you had internships using data analytics, like have Excel spreadsheets all over the place, Did you have such experiences as research or work? Cool. So I was working in USAID this summer, and I was a product manager. The problem I had was just I spent hours on just finding the right data because they had thousands of Tableau dashboards and many Excel spreadsheets, and it takes a lot of time to just upload the data. So I was thinking, how can we deal with that? I mean, if you know about RollStack, also that's a new YC startup, that they are just using Gen AI to automate the data. We just update everything on the spreadsheet, on their dashboards. So my idea is like something dynamic, not a statistic as Tableau Power BI, that you can have everything on your surface updating every day based on the different the metrics you want to use on. Like you have questions to answer for your business, for your project, but you don't want to look over all the Tableau and data. You have to find what data helps you to answer that question. So we were thinking of, we can have a dashboard just blank. You can answer a question, say, oh, these is my questions and these are what I want to achieve. And I have a data pilot, just a silo that I know what data we have access to. And because now every company are having built-in Gen AI inside their companies. So if we can have it as a SaaS B2B software that we create, we save the data in a third party, and then we run a database on their questions. So we just show them what they can want to see and what metrics we have. So for considerations, that's it.
I'm having trouble picturing like what that really is at the end. So I think you're talking really generally about problems and tools that are used really generally. And I think if you could instead start with a more specific, like here's an example of a problem. You don't have to do it now. Here's an example of a problem that we can solve. It'd probably be I think it'd be a lot easier to understand the power of this and how you would use it. And so rather than saying it can do all these things or it can answer these questions, like actually just explain how in a particular example it would go answer those questions. I think that would really help make it better.
Yeah, I'd say, pitch for something like that is so much easier if you can actually show like visual, but you're handicapped when you have to do the 2-minute upfront thing. So you're doing pretty good in that regard. There are certain shortcuts you can take in that where you do like analogies, where you say like, oh, it's like this, but in this context, and this is what I've done differently. I think it was good that you named the other startup and you sort of distance yourself from that. You talked about Tableau too. That stuff helps ground people in what they're thinking about. And I've been there too, where I'm trying to pitch something very technical and I have no visual aids. And then you're like, okay, well, imagine the screen looks like this. So, not bad.
It's just, I kept it high level because I didn't want to dive in for now. And think about we have
at high level, we just don't understand anything. Literally don't understand. So you have to go find a way to get deeper because high level doesn't work.
Also, it's okay if the product is that complicated. Your only goal in a 2-minute pitch is to get to the 15-minute pitch where you can show them the real thing. I had to do a lot of I'm not going to get them to understand my whole product in 2 minutes. I'm going to get them to go to the longer talk to actually understand what the thing is. So I just have to get them excited about that notion and give them some rough analogy that says, oh, that's interesting enough for me to turn the car over.
I appreciate it.
Cool, thanks.
All right, we're out of time for today, but I'm super glad that we got to the end and still had more people wanting to pitch. So we'll make sure you get up next time. This is a good reason to line up early, but we just we got to get to our speakers. So thank you guys for pitching. Thank you for pitching every week and being ready to go do it again. So we'll get you in next week. And Brian, take a minute and think about who you want to give $100 to while you come up and take a seat here next to me.
Maybe
Stormy's been drinking your water.
Which was
Mine's
the
clean.
Spice Pack? I forgot the name of the product.
Spice Pack? Awesome. Congratulations. All right. Thank you. That was great, guys. Seriously, those were awesome pitches. And they're just getting, obviously, some people are practicing, and they're getting better and better. Some people are trying for the first time, which is great. Thank you. As we've said many times, as Brian said, it's hard to come do this. And the number one thing that makes it easier is doing it. And so just getting up and practicing and doing it is super, super helpful. So please keep doing that. And also, it's open to all students at UT. So, again, I know one of the first pitches we saw was not someone who's in the class this semester. If you know other students that are working on cool things and want to get exposure for what they're working on, want to get feedback, want free pizza, hopefully, want to maybe win $100, want to maybe get in the lab next semester, have them come pitch. And it's a great way for me to get to know them and get introduced to them, for them to get other people thinking about them, and for them to get feedback. So thank you all for doing that. Okay, so today we've got Brian Frezza. Am I saying your last name right?
Yep.
Okay, great. And next week we're going to have a whole bunch of different UT student orgs here talking, and we'll do like a panel with them. So I think that'll be a really interesting one too. Usual stuff around class communications. So just skip through those, and yeah, we're gonna talk with Brian here. So Brian Frezza is the co-founder and co-CEO of Emerald Cloud Lab and Emerald Therapeutics. We can talk about what the difference is between those. I've been over to Emerald Cloud Lab in Austin, and it is super cool. My quick version of the pitch is that just like the cloud for computing was taking these computing jobs, things that needed to be processed, and sending them up to the cloud to be processed, and then you get back the results. They do that for biology, for biotech experiments and processes. And so you can submit a biotech job up to the cloud as code, as a description. But then it really goes and happens in the real world, like robots and people go and do the biotech experiments and then give you the results. And so for all the same reasons that the cloud, that makes it really scalable and efficient and really good, this I think can have a lot of those same effects for biotech. And so super interesting, super exciting, and really glad to have Brian here today to chat with us. So thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
All right, so let's just start with you personally a little bit. Tell us a little bit of your story. Where'd you grow up? Where'd you go to school? How did you get into becoming a robot biologist?
Fair question. So I grew up in eastern Pennsylvania, suburbs just north of Philly. I actually grew up on a street called Emerald Drive, which is why my companies are all named Emerald, because my co-founder and I also grew up 2 doors down from me.
You grew up together. That's awesome. I haven't met him yet.
And we went to elementary school together. So, and then actually, so we knew even from like high school age that we wanted to be involved in startups. We had connections in entrepreneurship. Like my brother was one of the first interns at PayPal. And my father had been a failed entrepreneur, honestly, through his career many times, but there's still lots of excitement to share around that. And so both my co-founder and I, when we were young, decided that even what university we go to was to be focused on what would launch us into starting our own company. So we went to undergrad at Carnegie Mellon. At the time, now it's like normal. I heard people reference like comp bio as a thing, but that was brand new back when we went to school. So we did computational biology, CS, and molecular bio.
CMU also had, I think, the first computer science department too.
Indeed, officially, because like MIT refused to recognize it as like a branch of EE for a long time. Yeah, and there's the same with comp bio. It was like they were just very quick to get that set up at CMU. It was very good about crossing boundaries, especially with disciplines. They're awesome at it. And then we went after that. We honestly we were going to start a company right away, but we kept kind of a weak pitch at the time for what was not the greatest idea, but we just wanted to get started. The message we heard from everybody at the time was, you're not going to be able to start a company, let alone get anyone to fund you, if you don't have 3 letters after your name. Go get a PhD, right? In the specific field that I'm in of like running experiments in biotech. They somewhat have a point. So we went off to grad school, and we almost went to the same grad school, but then decided to get a diversity of experience. So my co-founder went to Stanford, and I went to a place called Scripps Research, which is very heavily organic chemistry focused, and did my PhD in organic chemistry. And then we started Emerald Therapeutics right out of there. So that was literally the first year out, and we had 5 years during grad school to basically find really cool ideas. And this is going to sound funny only because of the date, but back when we graduated in 2010, the first startup we wanted to make, the thing that ends up being called Emerald Therapeutics, was a nucleic acid antiviral startup. So I was trying to stop a future pandemic that might come using nucleic acid therapeutics, and all venture capitalists thought I was crazy because clearly nucleic acids aren't going anywhere as therapeutics, and clearly why would anyone care about viruses or pandemics? That's a thing of the past. So struggled to get everyone to care about
timing matters.
Yeah, I was a little ahead of my time on that one. But what was interesting is we kind of, necessity is the mother of invention. So we raised right out of grad school, which is actually in biotech I've come to learn somewhat unheard of. Like biotech venture capital looks a lot different than traditional tech venture capital, where the entrepreneurs tend to come to the VCs with ideas in tech VC. That's the typical story you think of the, all the big entrepreneurs now who are household names. In biotech, it tends to work because everything is so much more expensive and so much riskier. You tend to have sort of in-house entrepreneurs and residents who factor around these bigger groups that have a lot of capital, and then they do much, much bigger initial rounds because it takes so much more to get done. And so we tried to go the tech route, and we raised what would be in tech a lot of money, but in biotech, my advisors kept making fun of me. They kept referring to my Series A as an angel round. I was like, no, it's a price round at Series A. And they're like, yeah, no, angel round, small money, right?
How big was that?
So that was the first round was 5, and it got extended to 7, which to me was like more money than I could ever even imagine. And having been a graduate student just before that, making $20,000 a year, so that felt like infinite money. But the normal at the time for starting a biotech that was something as ambitious as what we're trying to do would be like 30 to 40 million. So it was way smaller than that.
And was that through your brother's PayPal connections? Is that how you raised that initial money?
Part of it helped. It got the introduction.
Is that how you met Steve? That's who we met.
Yeah, I mean, it starts through, so my brother at PayPal was an intern, and he worked for Max Levchin.
Who has spoken at our class here before.
Oh,
yeah.
Awesome. Levchin is amazing.
Yeah, super cool.
Yeah, and he actually, the minute I arrived at grad school, he kept trying to get me to drop out, start a company. He's like, hey, if you're serious about starting a company, you need to drop out, And I have kind of a crazy story where I got all the way to the end of 5 years. I was supposed to
defend your thesis.
Defend my thesis, right? And my boss finds out that I have this crazy plan. He just mentions offhand, like a week before my defense. Oh, but you'll just do that experiment when you're done defending, because we'll finish up then. I was like, oh no, I'm leaving to start a company after this. I'm actually going to drive to San Francisco. And he's like, you're doing what? What is your plan? Like, have you talked to anyone about raising money? Like, no, not yet. Do you have a place to live? Have you thought about any of this yet? And the answer is like, no, we're just going to dive into this. And so he tried to stop it. This is going to sound not good from his point of view, but it really is. He's just being parental, trying to defend me. He's like, this is a half-baked plan. This can't happen. We're going to postpone your defense. So he said, you have to prepare. You have enough. At the time, I had enough for something like, I had 4 papers on his desk, but I could write another 2, something like that, which in our field is a lot. Just by example, like 1 or 2 is usually normal for graduation. But he said, hey, technically you can write these up, and so you have to do that before you can defend. So he cancels the defense, and it's postponed for a little bit. So being the impetuous 27-year-old I was at the time, I quit, like days before the 5-year thing finished. And so I left and said, well, I'll finish those papers, but I'll do it on my own time. I don't work for you anymore. I'm independent, and you can't stop the startup because now I'm not part of the university. This is this whole thing where university owns the IP of the stuff you work on. You have to be independent in order to deal with that. So that was crazy. And
is he still somebody you keep in touch
close.
with?
I'm very close to him. Yeah, I mean, he was doing it out of the goodness of his heart. It was just, scholarly
he was doing what he thought was best for you.
Yeah, it was definitely what he thought was in my best interest. We just had a disagreement about how that would work out. And the introductions I got in Silicon Valley were very helpful because I went to Max and said, you've been telling me to drop out for 5 years. Well, I took your advice. He's like, weren't you graduating next week? I was like, that was the plan. But guess what? And that actually helped because some of the first meetings I had
shows how committed you are.
People were like, they just wanted to meet the crazy kid who would drop out weeks before finishing a 5-year program. Like, why does he care this much about any of this stuff? And that matters a lot, and I think the right VCs will pick up on that. Like, your commitment to the idea, your commitment to changing the world in that thing is actually the biggest, highest order bit of everything else that's involved. If that's not there, it will not happen. And so there is something to be said for total commitment, being lashed to the mast in the way that it was. And that helped get some of our initial meetings.
Yeah. So what was Emerald Therapeutics?
That was the antiviral.
Antiviral. And so what happened to that company that you raised $7 million for?
It still exists. So it ended up being, so the first thing we did once we got funded.
It didn't blow up during COVID?
It did not.
No.
There was the story's still there, but that company was originally we found the 10 brightest scientists that we'd ever worked with before and tried to pull them all together to build this company for the first time. We generally knew what product we were going to build, so they spoke our language already. They described exactly what we were trying to build, and people got excited about that idea beyond anything else. It was like, well, we got to make that happen. That makes a ton of sense. Let's get behind this. And then we all quickly figured out that we didn't have nearly enough money to make that work and had to figure out how. And so we started building tools internally. And one thing that was an advantage of, we just taught everyone to code. So there was something that myself and my co-founder already know how to do, and some of the other founders as well. We were like employees number 2, 3, 4. And so it became a normal thing that every new scientist we brought in the company was usually a PhD in a particular field that we needed expertise in. So a molecular biologist, geneticists, even mathematicians and this sort of thing. As we brought them in, we would teach them how to code in a common language, and we were then building our own tool sets for managing data. And so there was a point at which we were generating too much data from the instruments, and it was like too much effort to pull it all together, that my co-founder and I said, my co-founder told me to go do a work vacation, like go disappear for a week, build us a system, come back, I don't want to see you again until you made it work. And the first thing that came out of this is what's now called Symbolic Lab Language, or SL, is the first version of that, which was this symbolic language to drive the experiments in the lab. So you need a way to like tell the computer what you want to have happen in the physical laboratory, and that didn't really exist.
So basically, you made a programming language for biology, for biotech, or experiments.
That was the idea.
Yeah, and that was the start.
It worked because it was just 10 of us who were bright enough to figure that out right away, and I wasn't even trying to sell it. We were just trying to use it. So we just built it and then had everyone use it, and it was terrible interface. It was just pure code at the time. You had to do everything directly. But we started getting like huge numbers of experiments done with very few people, because everything had been set up so that you're just sort of issuing these commands and then you're executing them on the machine. So it would automatically like load onto the machine, parse the data off. We could sort of script what was happening, and we'd have to like take turns going down in the lab loading the machines up. We didn't have an operations team at the time, but that's something that sort of came later. And then interestingly, I couldn't get, speaks to my pitching ability not being great, I could not get VCs to care about the virus prior to the pandemic, because they did not see any of that coming. But they saw what I was doing in the lab, and they were like, how are you generating like tens of thousands of microscope images with like 10 people? Like, how is that happening? So I would show them, well, we built this internal tool, and then that was the only thing I get them to focus on. They were like very focused on that, and they're like, well, why isn't that a thing in the world? Can you go sell that? And after hearing that a bunch of times, and then also comparing notes with our fellow scientists, what are you guys doing in the lab? Nothing like this, right? They were like, that's wild, I've never heard of that before. That we ended up spinning that off on its own company. And that became a much larger company. There was a moment where people had to decide which company they were going with, the therapeutics company, the Cloud Lab. And the Cloud Lab.
Was there a right decision? All right, I want to ask you that here.
Both are still alive, so we'll see. The therapeutics people are, after the pandemic, they are committed. So there's like 3 of them working now across the country. One of them is in Manhattan. She leads the research. And then there's 2 other chemists. One is in Nevada now. The other one is in North Carolina. They all just log on every day, talk through all their experiments, run crazy numbers of experiments.
And they're all using Emerald Cloud Lab to do it.
Yep.
Yeah.
And they're all the most senior users of the system.
Have you ever heard of or met Joe Lemont? Trilogy. He's another one of Steve's mentors and mine. Joe was the founder of Trilogy Software. Joe, I moved here to Austin to work with Joe at Trilogy, and he's an incredible entrepreneur. Definitely one of the best I've ever seen. And in a similar way, he built a number of different tools that they built for Trilogy that ended up becoming their own companies, right? One of them was called GDev, and it was in the early days of outsourcing just development and coding development, right? And turning that into something much more of a productized, predictable, everybody's measured, and you kind of know what you're getting, process kind of thing, and became its own tool. I think Slack started that way. I don't know if anyone knows that story, but I think Slack was an internal tool that they built for doing communication with their own team for something else, and then suddenly they were like, okay, actually, this is the thing.
Twitter too.
Yeah.
I think it's very common to have, like, use the term dog fooding your own product.
Yeah.
But yeah, building something for yourself is a perfectly reasonable way to get to a really good product design because you care about using it.
Yeah.
And you have to have that feeling towards it. It's a little weird when you're, especially in enterprise, like a lot of not great products get developed because you're just sort of like interviewing the customer and saying, what exactly do you want me to build? And then you do your best to build it, but you don't really have a strong feeling of cohesive product there. You're just trying to like bat down problems. And that tends to not lead to as cohesive a product as if you yourself are going to be sitting in the driver's seat, you're using it, you care about it, you care about the quality of life elements of it, how it all talks together.
And you were users of this product.
Yeah, we didn't build it for anyone else at the beginning, it was just us.
Yeah.
It was later on we were like, okay, we got to make like a graphical interface and stuff like that.
So every startup's hard. Being an entrepreneur is hard. What's extra hard about what you're doing? And why would you pick something so extra hard?
It's a great question. I mean, both of the things I've done are extremely difficult. It's the reason I want to do it too, is that they're also just incredibly unprecedented. So there is something to say for, there's a natural inertia to the world, and the bigger and the more radical the change you're trying to make, the more the world will push back on you out of just natural inertia. It's what's going to happen. And you have to be prepared for that and have the grit to deal with that.
Most people don't like change.
Yeah. And you have to recognize that that's a natural consequence of trying to do something big. If you try to do something that's modest and small, you won't deal with nearly as much pushback and pain on that thing. People will be pretty excited about your idea. The larger your idea gets, even if it's more helpful to everyone, it's such a good thing, the more pushback you get. It's weird to think about, but like the folks who figured out antibiotics for the first time had way more pushback than the first two people who figured out, like, you know, waffle ice cream cones, because immediately everyone was like, dude, that's great, right? But clearly one of those, the world, if they had to pick one of those two technologies to survive,
It's clearly waffle ice cream cones.
right?
Yeah.
So it's counterintuitive, but it's the truth of what you have to do. So if you're going to sign up for the big missions like that, you have to be ready to deal with the big pushback.
Yeah. So what's hard about building something that involves physical stuff versus just like, I can go code it?
Money?
Yeah. Why was $5 to $7 million not a lot? How fast did you spend? What did you spend that on?
More than
Well, actually, that was the therapeutic company. So how much did you raise for Emerald Cloud Lab to start, and what did you spend it on?
That's a good question. The first ECL dedicated round was like 20 to 25, something like that.
So bigger round.
Big round.
And what did you spend? Why'd you need all that money?
Around half of our money to date has always gone into equipment. So it's like buying machinery, essentially, that goes in the lab itself. Then a ton of that has to go into the software development piece, something called the scientific development, so that's building the actual interface to the language. And yeah, that's all very expensive. You need big R&D teams. So
Yeah.
huge R&D to build something new it's unprecedented, no one's built it before.
And did that first $25 million get you one lab? Because you've got a couple. The idea is many labs right now. I think you got at least two, right?
It did. Probably one of the craziest things is, and all credit goes to my investors for being cool enough to figure this out, but like MVP is the right way to think about things. However, there are some things for which the MVP is very expensive to get to, and that's tough for people to accept. People will try. You gotta realize when you have a real MVP or something that's not real. So, classic example.
MVP is not crappy version. It's like minimum good version, right? Viable is good.
You have to be able to draw the dotted line easily enough when you're using
Useful.
it that you can see the full thing, right? And it needs to be, if it's validating information like price point and something like that, it needs to actually be a stand-in for the full product. So like, here's the example of things I had to push back on. People were like, okay, I needed to bring online, it's literally over 200 different pieces of scientific instrumentation to make the whole thing work, to be able to credibly do everything you might do in a laboratory in this cloud laboratory. That's a 10-year slog of development we had to do. It's a crazy notion for a startup to say, oh, we're just going to do 10 years of R&D before we start making money.
So it took you 10 years?
It did. It was no kidding that.
Did the investors expect that when you started?
No. Well, some of them got that right away, but everyone reasonably asked, couldn't you just do one experiment, one device, right? And the answer to that, the real answer to that was no, because if you tried to do one device, a couple things would matter right away. First of all, you wouldn't need to build the technology, the operating system, to get everything to talk to itself anyway. That's harder than just, say, automating one problem. Making, like, say, an automated microscope is a different class of problem than the entire laboratory communicates with this constant language, it runs fulfillment centers nonstop, et cetera. So you end up building a different product that's nothing like the thing you would build if you tried to build the MVP. In other words, you'd have to scrap the MVP completely. And then, from a product pricing perspective, if you just have the one item, you're a commodity where everyone's saying, like, what's the cheapest version of this? So a good comparable for us in the past is like when FedEx starts, the whole notion, which by the way, like, failed its business plan as I understand it, like submitted it to business school and they were like, this is a terrible idea, you fail. And then they went like, well, we're doing it anyway, and started FedEx. But the notion with FedEx originally was like, distribution and sorting was actually harder than getting things mailed out. And so they said, let's make one giant sorting and distribution center in the center of the country where land is cheap. We'll ship everything to one place, we'll sort it all out overnight, and then send them back out on wherever else to get there. So even if you're mailing something to someone down the street, it's going to go If instead their pitch to the world is anywhere in the US overnight, one day, high price point, they can command a very different price point than you would otherwise. So you can, in that case, you kind of have to build the full thing to get to the end.
Yeah, it's often, some people don't understand what the kind of the bar, barrier to entry, right? The minimum bar is. My background was in email. And I think a lot of people don't realize, like, making an email client, one of the reasons there are not many different, like, email clients, there's like Gmail and Outlook and like a few things, and Superhuman, which was a successful but very hard attempt, is just the breadth of things you need to do to have email be useful. Like, it has to be able to open every kind of different email you get. And there's a bunch of just complicated stuff in there. There's just like a ton of code and things you got to go write, test on all these different situations. And it's like, and that's before you ever get to do anything new. Like, that's just to make it do all the basic stuff every email thing needs to go do, right? And so it's a big barrier to entry for people to go start. And obviously with hardware or physical things, it can be like that too. So let me tell you what it's like when I went to Emerald Cloud Lab. Has anybody here been to a data center? A couple people. You can probably imagine what a data center looks like. A data center, it's like a big warehousey kind of place. It's loud. You hear like fans and machines going, right? It's like, wah! And like there's kind of like long hallways of computers, like long rows, just racks and racks and racks of computers. And they're all buzzing and whirring and air flowing and things like that, right? Lots of cables coming out of them, going up to the ceiling, right? So, and this in a lot of ways looks a lot like that. You walk in and it's just this massive warehouse. It's like really high ceilings. What? Oh yeah, can we see it?
Yeah.
All right, let's turn it on. We'll turn it on, so he'll show you.
Describing it.
Yeah, and so you see all these, racks of machines, but instead of having servers on them, they've got little robots that move vials around, and actually do tests, and some are like, maybe, I'm just making stuff up now, but centrifuges, right, or other things will like combine things together and do the different kinds of tests that you need to go do. What kind of robot is this?
The touring robot I'm on right now?
Yeah.
I forget the name.
Is it Beam suitable? We have little Beam robots.
No,
drive
we should
around.
check that out though.
Yeah, it's not. It's just fun.
I think it's a cheaper knockoff of this.
Yeah, but they're super fun. So you can see it. It's these rows and rows of machines on each side. Those are like different types of machines that do experiments. And I'm sure he'll tell you more about this, but the idea is that each one of these is pretty automated. And there are people that have to walk around and like pick up the results from one machine and bring them to the next machine, or like put the stuff into the machine to load it up. But as he'll probably tell you more about, they've really tried to make that something as like simplified as possible. Like instead of something that you need a PhD to go pull out the test tubes and put them into this other machine, it's something that maybe somebody that you hire and train from a community college could go do, or something like that. You want to talk more about it?
Yeah, sure. I mean, they're giant fulfillment centers for running experiments. So people log on with software, program in what they want to have done.
What's that guy doing?
So that guy is an operator who's loading and unloading a machine. So he's getting instructions on the tablet on his cart. You can kind of see right in front of us. This little thing here is a tablet. And it's telling him how to load and unload things, and then he's got to use a barcode scanner to identify stuff as it comes on and off that machine. It's a flash chromatography system. And so the idea here is that 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, we're constantly running this, and a team that doesn't necessarily understand the context of your experiment. So these are mostly being run by pharma and biotech companies across the globe. And they don't have time to train us up on a specific method because they might be just trying that method as a one-off, or they want it to get run like immediately within hours of hitting enter. And so they do that, and then they're going to get the instructions to load and unload here. And then it's going to talk to all of the software directly. So what you won't find is like PCs next to all these instruments, because it's just talking to the software directly, telling it what to do in terms of the robotics, the liquid handling, the sample processing, et cetera. And so it's basically just transported around the facility that we're using operations for, and then we can, at a price point that's like very affordable, run tons and tons of experiments.
So why is this more affordable? Why is this cheaper? It looks more complicated and more sophisticated.
So a couple reasons. One is you consolidate the facilities down. Usually the way it looks with this equipment, which I think visually you can get a sense of, it isn't inexpensive, right? It's millions of dollars worth of equipment. That equipment is usually person to person. And as a scientist,
like, here's my machine.
Yeah, it's like, this is my machine, I'm going to use this one. It's in my lab for my people. Maybe I'm sharing it with like 6 or 7 other people, but not much more than that, right? So it's like a person to person thing. And this equipment costs millions of dollars. And so it's a big thing as a scientist. Certainly even when I was in grad school, the biggest question on our mind about starting the company was, how are we going to get the equipment?
Which
so that's what I spent it
isn't
on.
totally dissimilar from the cloud computing either, where you needed to get access to different types of compute. Or today you're trying to get, AI processing or other things like that.
Right, trying to get access to GPUs and stuff like that. So this notion that it's in a shared center means that this equipment can be running 24/7, 365. It's very efficient. So with big pharma companies, the idea is like you're consolidating down. Maybe instead of having 10 labs, you have one big one that's running one for everybody. People are logging on remotely. They don't have to physically be here.
You're the FedEx.
Yeah.
Chip resorting center.
Right, and the 24-hour nature of it is important. So being able to hand off experiments without people talking to each other is part of why like the software is caring for what's getting done, and we're sort of doing the logistical aspects of this center. That's part of what keeps the science moving kind of at maximum pace. The big, like the eye-popping numbers are things like when you get a scientist trained up on how to use a cloud lab, they will run 5 to 8 times more experiments per day because they're just issuing instructions over the cloud to say this is what I need to run, instead of spending all day in front of this equipment tending to it themselves, person to person. They design the experiment, they hit go, and then it's off to the races.
And so the scientists all become programmers.
Right. So that's a challenging thing because they're not set up to do that.
They don't actually touch the test tubes anymore.
Right. They have to learn how to program, and the payoff there is that they're not spending all day trapped, at the lab bench. Right. Instead, they're doing design of experimentation, analysis of data, deciding what to do next. These are the things that as a scientist, that's what you get excited about when you first get into it. And pipetting the test tube gets old really fast if you've done it before.
Has anybody here pipetted a test tube?
There you
Okay,
go.
some people know what we're talking about.
The novelty wears off quickly once you get to grad school, and it's like I got 5 more years doing this, and that's the rate limiting factor to making my research move.
So this is almost like a calculator, like taking off the grunge work but for biotech.
Right, exactly. It's a tool. So
Yeah.
we call them fulfillment centers too. You'll see it's a mixture of. This is another thing that was a surprise to me. I thought everything would be a robot when I first started building this, and then I realized, well, commercially at scale, some things are robots, some things are fulfillment. You can, whatever is most reliable and cost effective. If you walk into a factory, it's never going to be a lights out only robot facility. There's going to be humans and machines working in there in the most cost effective way possible of delivering that product. And that's the same thing you have to think about when you're running these centers at scale. And importantly, when we built the interface to how this all works in fulfillment, we didn't pretend it was only going to be a robot. We thought about people as, like operations was part of the process from day one. And that's what's given us a competitive edge to other startups who've tried to get on this idea, have limited themselves to only doing things that are what people call automation friendly. So there's a couple of operations that robots do really well, like handling liquids is one of them.
And that gets back to the MVP. If you want to be a complete solution, you can't just do the things you can automate.
Right, because that's a solution looking for a problem, right? You're like, I know how to do this easily, so that's what I'm going to offer people. But that's not solving the heart of the problem for them is both. So like classic thing, liquid handling with robots, great. Solid handling with robots, like weighing out solids, trash. It's terrible. It's a known terrible thing.
So you're saying like if I need to go measure a liquid and pull a certain amount out, that's easy with a robot.
Easy.
But measuring out like flour would be hard.
Just garbage. Like, the robots are terrible at it. There'll be a time that they'll get better at it, but right now they're terrible, right? And if you're trying to solve the product for your client at the end of the day, you can't tell them they can't use solids, right? Obviously in a lab, you're gonna have to use solids in addition to liquids. You have to care about the full problem that you're solving for them, not how you're solving it. How you're solving it is a means to an end, but what problem you're solving is what builds the product that they're gonna get excited about. And so that, I think, has been the secret to our success so far, is that we have not locked ourselves into doing only automation-friendly things. Cool. So what else can I show you?
So there's a kind of famous saying from Mark Andreessen, I believe it was him, and he said, in the future, this was probably 5 or 10 years ago, either computers are going to tell you what to do, or you're going to tell computers what to do. I don't know if anybody's heard that saying. And this seems like a great example of both of those things. You've got the researchers now telling the computers what to do, submitting these jobs, right, things like that. And then you've got the people on the floor that are pushing those carts that are similar to like driving an autonomous car. Like the cart has a little thing on it, and it's like, go over to this station. I'm making some assumptions here, Brian, so tell me if I'm wrong. But it's like, go over to this station. Okay, pull out the tray, put it on the cart. go over to this station, take the tray you just got, put it in this other machine, right? Like, is it? I'm sure it's more sophisticated than that, but like, they're going around following instructions, right? Is there anything more to add about that?
No, I'd say that's pretty bang on. I think that's just one of the common traps, if I get to give advice to a younger self, is I was too focused on like how I was solving the problem than what problem I was solving. If you're really being honest about a product you want everyone to use, you have to be agnostic to how you solve it, and your solution is just whatever's best for whoever's using it at the end of the day.
I have a little robot competition with you. Turn around.
I see we're telepresence on telepresence.
Yes, I'm here too.
I like yours better. It's smaller.
Yeah, is it smaller?
Yeah, mine's bigger.
These are, I think I'm echoing a little bit. These are. They don't even make these anymore, but we have them all over the place. They're fun. I love seeing that you have one too. All right. All right. Well, you want to come back, sit down,
Sure.
and we are now. It's about time where we can roll into questions. I'm going to put the robot back. So I hope you guys all have some questions. And do we have a microphone over there?
Yeah.
Awesome. So who wants to start in the front row?
I guess like one of the first questions that since you guys already made your DSL for the lab, are you guys like looking into making a no-code compiler tool for the different scientists? Because essentially once you already have the language that controls the software, you can just make some no-code platform that compiles instructions down to it.
You are thinking 100% correctly about this, which is, again, thinking about your customer. So basically, I have to back them into coding, but they're never going to want to code. They're going to want to focus on the experiment itself. So indeed, that was the first thing we built was when we became commercial versus just using internally, was a graphical no-code system where you point and click your way through the design, and it spits out the code on the other end. And you absolutely needed that. That was another thing. I was way too obstinate at the beginning. I was like, no, you can just code it. What's the problem?
And I guess
because no one's going to want to do that.
And I guess the second thing is that I know you mentioned like the first one was like antiviral stuff. So like, are y'all planning on incorporating, like I know recently, and then they won the Nobel Prize for Biology. It was like the transformer that simulated protein simulation, like protein folding. Like, is that y'all's plan to like incorporate that to see if like a job is even viable to run, like prevent wasting time, or is that just that the jobs are like so quick to run that it doesn't even matter?
Does anyone else know what protein folding is? Okay, maybe explain that too. I'm surprised. That's more than I expected. I don't. Yeah.
It's pretty good. Yeah, how a protein folds affects its structure-function relationship. We're all nucleic acid-based, so we're not in the protein folding realm. A lot of those tools are what you would call homology-based, so they're based on like historical precedents of how proteins have folded before. So they don't do a necessarily good job of doing a purely open-ended physical calculation. There's a bunch of quantum chemistry software that does a really good job of doing that, and we sometimes play around with that in modeling. We are at the point, though, where I am in development hell, if I'm being honest about this therapeutic, where I'm trying to create a conjugate that, this is very detailed, it's a conjugate that doesn't mess up this branch migration reaction on these strands of DNA in order to get the thing to process the way it needs to. And we've tried several hundred forms of conjugates that have all not worked. We're working for the last one. I would say the team there, because the size of that thing, if successful, is so much bigger. Even in the cloud lab is, what I'm doing there is trying to save pharma companies of their 10 billion of R&D, 2 billion a year would be like a good number to try to save them with the technology I'm using. If the therapeutic works though, then we have a way to cure viruses. That's much bigger. And so the team there is like fully committed to making this work any way possible, and it has been so painful because we're trying to do some novel chemistry that
It's the real
there's no
research.
precedence. Yeah, this is full-on science project hard.
So yeah, you talked about 10 years being the amount of time needed to launch your first MVP, and arguably that's a long time, like you said. So my question is, was there any moment of uncertainty, like during that period, or hardship? Like, did you always anticipate
Many
reaching
moments
that
probably,
MVP?
but
Yeah, I mean, like I said, the scale of what you're doing will engender pushback, and so you have to be willing to.
So what's an example of that pushback? What was like, what was some other pushback you got?
I think it's internal and external. Externally, it's always about trying to raise the money to get to the next step. trying to get people to accept a new notion. We get a lot of things that in the cloud lab space it's easier to understand. Stuff like, oh, but people don't understand. It sounds like just a buzzword, right? But I remember back, you guys are too young to remember this, but cloud computing was a buzzword too, according to people at the beginning. Everyone who built it was like,
They're
no,
never
we know
going to do
exactly
anything
what
serious
we're
there.
talking about.
Yeah.
Right, exactly. They're like, oh, what is this? Like, why is AWS any different than Rackspace? And you're like, no, they're very different, right, if you're actually using it.
Side note, I was Rackspace's biggest customer for a short period of time.
Right, which, by the way, was already groundbreaking on top of that. So there's like groundbreaking upon groundbreaking things that had to happen there. But it was a lot of people who probably didn't understand on the first pitch, like what the heck that even was.
Yeah.
So getting the world to accept
Rackspace was provisioning machines, not compute.
and really well,
Yeah.
right? Like
And they were great at
conquered
that, but it
domain.
was not the same.
Right, but those technology leaps are tough because it'll be intuitive. If you're living it every day, you'll feel it, you'll understand it deeply, but your customers will constantly be getting introduced to you and say, what the heck is this, right? And it's tough to do that until after it. And there's a lot of stuff there. There's fear is both real and imagined that you have to get people over. You guys are probably young enough that you remember when like Lyft and Uber came around. Maybe you were young kids when that happened, but like all of us were saying like, ha, I'm gonna get in a car with a stranger, they're just gonna axe murder me, that's crazy. And then until we did it once, then we're like, oh wait a minute, taxi drivers are also just strangers. This isn't that weird. This is way better.
It's actually less weird.
Experience,
kind of,
right?
like,
That's
yeah.
like, and we all, are just doing the phone. That's way better, right? So some of that stuff it's a lot of show don't tell, but getting people even to that point is difficult. So that's the kind of pushback you deal with. Keeping your team focused on that is also hard. Getting anyone to sign up for a 10-year mission, by the way, damn near impossible, right? And so people have to believe in the vision of what you're trying to build enough that they're willing to get behind building that thing.
I'm gonna just go ahead and make a broad generalization, but I find that like young people today, people aren't all like, people are not into making real long-term commitments. Nobody's like thinking about things like I'm gonna do this for 10 years. They're like, it's just like, whereas like I feel like people used to more. Like I think in the past 15, 20 years, like that has been a shift of, people stay in jobs less time. They expect, there's more of the what economy? The sharing economy, or like this kind of like freelancer, work with multiple kind of things and change jobs. And I think that's great in so many ways. Like it's an awesome thing and it's a great thing for a lot of people. And at the same time, like doing really important things takes a long time and is really hard.
Yeah, and recruiting a top team, interestingly, because the idea itself, the technology itself is compelling, if the people understood what we're working on, that's already the filter to get them involved in it. But you have to do a pitch of like, you're signing up for a hard life if you're doing that. So I spent a lot of time, convincing the scientists I'm working with, like, hey, what does the like richest person in the world end up spending their money on? It's like, oh, new medicine would be good. Okay, good, vote with your feet. It doesn't matter how much money you have, you can't buy these cures, the stuff we're working on. But you have the talent to go research this thing and you have the rare opportunity to go do it. Are you willing to put your heart behind that even though you're not gonna get immediately rich? If we are successful in the long term, definitely you're gonna be rewarded, but this is gonna be a heck of a risky mission. And you have to be willing to sign up for that and try to do something that has this low probability of success. I mean, that's part of it too, is like, I think I didn't appreciate the degree to which startups are not a get-rich-quick thing at all. There is a direct proportion to, risk-reward relationship. Like if you're doing something that's not terribly risky and makes a ton of sense, you're probably not gonna be a billionaire. That's not gonna happen. The folks that do that thing that really pushes the world, that's a drastic change, it's because it was very risky. And those are proportional. It's not as if, it can often be tempting to be like, oh, I'll just avoid risk, that's a bad thing. We're like, okay, well then you're not going to change the world. If you want to do these big things, you have to accept that your most likely outcome is failure. And that is inherent in the very idea of what you're trying to do.
Yeah.
I want to say like your company is super impressive and the mission, and it got me thinking like regarding how much it can change like the research scene in developing countries, because like universities can't afford the labs, and like your project and company can help them with that. And like my question is like where do you see your company like in the future in like 5 or 10 years or so?
Great question. If I have my druthers, then I would like this to become the standard way in which people do research. I got most excited first year in grad school. There was a really cool class, a bioorganic chemistry class, where we talk about building new medicine. so do medicinal modalities, really like platforms. And I just remember being so excited about, hey, I get to like think about this for a living. That is so cool. And I remember my professor kind of chuckling in the corner, and this ended up being my advisor too, so I love the guy, close relationship. And he's like, well, hold on to that excitement now, Brian, because what's going to happen is you're going to decide to devote your life to one, maybe two of these ideas. If you're lucky, will maybe get the chance to see the light of day, and probably won't. And that's what it looks like right now. So to me, I quickly saw in building the Cloud Lab, it's like if I can reduce the distance between having an idea and being able to get it out in the world, that's huge, because I saw all this creative energy. Like even the final presentations of that class, any one of those things would save millions of lives if we were successful. Now, they're mostly not likely to succeed. They're big bets, right? But if you can get the cost of that down to like $1 million instead of $30 million, that's a major contribution to the world. It means we're all going to get way more shots on goal.
Pizza's here. So I'm just making this up. I really don't know if this is going to work or not. But why don't we, rather than completely disrupting everything, one in this half, you guys go grab some pizza. I think there's plenty of pizza. And try to be quiet and quick about it. And then we'll keep answering questions over here. And then the other half can go. So everybody can grab some while it's hot.
Hey, Brian, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah?
I can't see. I don't know where you are, though.
Yeah, I'm right here.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry. I just want to ask, so like, obviously like, this is extremely impressive. And, you know, being at the forefront of biotechnology for the past 10, 15 plus years now with your MVP and now with the company, you know, what kind of like research have you seen the most advancement in, and what do you think is like the next big thing in terms of like where you see biotechnology heading and where, you know, your lab could help take the whole field?
Cool question. Fun thing to think about.
What fundamentally changes once you can do this?
I think the most exciting things I've seen have come out of universities. So we are doing work with Carnegie Mellon. They have their own cloud lab. And they've been doing a couple of cool things. One being this concept that people are throwing around. It's a weird term, but they're using the term self-driving experiments. This is academics trying to find a good metaphor for like self-driving car. But really what they're saying here is if there's a computational interface to run the experiment, there's a computational interface to receive the data. That's what we built, the plumbing, right? Then why not use an AI to do optimization automatically? And so that looks like, say you're trying to purify a compound for the first time. You give it, instead of telling it, here are the exact settings on the machine I need to try, which is what you would normally do as a scientist, and you do guess and check. So you go like, I have an educated guess that maybe this will help me purify my material. I try it. It doesn't work. So I adjust something, I try again. I do that a couple times till I get something to work. But people are now doing stuff where they're acting one level meta to that, and they're getting the AI to do all that grinding. So it tries a bunch of different things until it tries to achieve
And they give it a goal.
And you give it a goal, right?
So it's kind of like a coding co-pilot.
Yeah, you give it an evaluation function, you tell it how to do that. So that seems very cool to me, and I could see us, it's a natural progression of moving up the abstraction layer, where scientists will start to not think about a single experiment, but like a whole bevy of experiments that are being run at the low level detail by the AI, and they're still at the top level trying to decide how it all fits together and where they're aiming with that.
So then if you trained an LLM on your coding language, then you could ask it how to solve some problem? Or
there was a cool paper in Science that came out where someone did exactly that with the Cloud Lab. And they asked it basically to go look up papers to figure out how to do a thing. And it downloaded a bunch of papers, reads a bunch of papers, and then it went and read all of our help files and was like, well, how do I get the lab to do that? And then it wrote a function to go try to do those things. So they nominally got the thing to work. It needs a lot of like tuning and help
right.
to get
and
there.
So maybe 5 or 10 years from now, you're saying, find a compound that has, you know, like find the combination that gives me these properties or these characteristics, and it's trying all the experiments.
Yeah, you can easily see if I'm at the base layer of trying to get us like, our slogan is transcend the lab, so I'm trying to get us to like put down our lab coats, which by the way is a transition that's happened in other industries. If you look at semiconductor, you go look at newsreels of people doing as semiconductor engineers, circuit engineers in like the 60s and 70s, they're all wearing lab coats because they used to be in the fab themselves putting chips into ovens, and that was normal. And what happens is come 80s, Morris Chang comes along and says, he starts TSMC and says, you know what, we're going to build an open foundry where like if you tape out to these rules, and there's a giant rule book about how it has to be laid out, I can make any chip for you, and then you don't have to worry about fabricating the chip, just the design of the chip. And what comes out of that is companies like Apple and NVIDIA, and they don't have to make their own chips anymore. It's a separate layer of the industry. Somebody else has solved that problem. And TSMC, now, like everyone does this, the Samsung, AMD have their fabs too.
Yeah.
But it's a great field, and we're trying to get the same motion in biology. But you can see even those things get stepped up. So there's other analogies like the electronic design automation was a huge thing in semiconductor. That doesn't really exist in my world yet, but totally could, where people are using it to like assist design of experimentation by simulating what happens in the experiment before the experiment actually happens. That's another thing that's happening in academia right now. It's very cutting edge.
Yeah.
Stuff like that.
Congratulations. That seemed to work incredibly well. Would you guys like to get some pizza if you want to go over to the other side? There's a company in our portfolio we've been working with for a long time that I'd love to introduce you to. Maybe or maybe not you've heard of. They're called Macromoltec. And what they do is they would basically simulate a whole bunch of experiments so that they could basically, say there's like 10,000 ones you could run, they would be like, well, try these 1,000 first, kind of thing. Not like suggesting they give you the answer, they're just like, can we give you the ones more likely to work?
That is a perfect marriage with the tech I have, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'll have to introduce you. Her name's Monica Berendo, and she's great. But that was, we probably invested in that in 2014, 15. I mean, it was like, that was us getting into biotech, and but it was all software, right? So. All right, do we have another question on this side? Oh, one more over here.
Oh, hey. My name's John. I'm a student at UT, and right now I'm contemplating whether or not to go into industry, be a research student, or do a startup, right? And you have a unique perspective on going into research and doing startup. And I'm very curious on kind of the way research knowledge reflected in your startup and like kind of the relationship and insight you could give me. That'd be incredible.
Oh, big burden there. I would say my experience in academia, especially if you're getting a PhD in sort of chemistry and biology, which is the realm I was in, the first 2 years you learn a ton. So everyone's actually excited. First years are like known to be wet behind the ears, like they're having fun. You will quickly find out, though, after your first 2 years, it's like, and now time served for the remaining 3, is you're going to be chained to the bench and you're going to spend all this time doing physical lab work in order to get to the 2 or 3 publications you need to graduate. There may be a way to play that system that's better than I did. I would not wait until a week before defending dropout. Would not recommend. 0 stars. In terms of like whether or not industry is a good fit or research is a good fit, it's all about personality and what you like to do. I think this is true for generally any startup, so I can make this sort of a generic statement. Because you can also decide startup versus big company. And often when people are deciding that, big companies are going to be more well supported, so you're going to be able to focus more cleanly on whatever the thing is that is your main thing. So if I do this, there's a bunch of support people who do the other things that I can lean on to do that thing. If you're in a startup, it's like you have to wear every hat because there's no one there to catch the problem. So if like no one's taking the trash out, guess what? You are the garbage person today because somebody needs to do that, right? And so you have to be willing to do that sort of thing. Now the trade-off in a startup is you don't get, it's way more flexible in terms of barriers. You don't have to convince 100 people something is a good idea. You have to convince 5, right? And then you can go off and do the thing. And so if you're okay with, and you're excited by treading new ground and doing that sort of thing, you may be better off in a smaller company, a startup. Even research has like aspects of that fit similar.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm gonna run through a couple things here. Okay, so you said when you're talking about like making a language as opposed to this like sort of universal tool, as opposed to like a singular use case scenario. And obviously like that takes a lot more effort to pull off. More effort equals like more dollars in the door, but it also means, like you said, it's difficult to sell people on the thing when it's a novel thing. So like, yeah, how the hell did you get people to like invest in you? You know what I'm saying? Like, invest in like the more universal
You're right.
thing.
The quickest way to get kicked out of a VC's office is telling me you have 10-year ROI.
Yeah.
That won't play it today. Partially, I came at the right moment to the Valley. Like, Elon had just put a rocket into orbit, and every VC was green with envy, and is like, I want to do big science stuff. Why are we not doing big science stuff? So it helped that we showed up at that moment with the big science play.
Timing matters.
That people were excited about. Today's environment is not one in which you're going to do anything that doesn't have short ROI. Everyone is very short-looking right now. They're not bullish. So they want to see product like right away. I think if you get the right, you have to find true believers to your idea. This is true with any startup. If you get people who are looking to cash out, who are not in this, they may be fast money, but they're not. It's not worth taking it if you're going to be frictional with them. If you have a different view of how this thing is going to end versus them.
If they're going to be pushing you to sell, or like when you don't want to, or
go partner with someone, go sell, shut up and become a consulting company is a common fate for many startups. Just end up being consulting companies because it's an easy money way to do. Because you'll probably have like a great team, and if you have no product, that's the quick way to make money. Is like just go do work for somebody on contract. So you have to share that vision with your VCs, and you will find that this is another thing too. Is there are already pathways for VCs that are out there looking for things. They're not interested in investing in anything that isn't going to make them $1 billion. So those are the ones that have to be willing to take major risks, and they're already set up to receive ideas that will look wild and weird and coming from young people who have crazy notions and stuff like that. And it will look to the outside world like it's all chaotic and doesn't make any sense. But there is a rhyme and reason to that, because that's what historically big changes look like. So if you have those big ideas and you're sure that they ultimately work, you can get in front of the right people. It's a challenge, and you're going to have to network to get there, but they're also looking for you. And that's an important thing to sort of realize. Everyone's trying to pair up. If you have a short business that's like next year is going to make a ton of money, there's a ton of investors looking for you too, and they just want to get their cut, and they'll do pretty well, and they'll take a much smaller cut, by the way, than the guys who are going to fund you for a 10-year mission. But,
it's a common story, but Amazon, Jeff Bezos had to pitch like 100 people to get somebody to say yes, right? And in hindsight, you're like, what? Like how? It should be so obvious because he's so impressive, because Amazon works so well, but like. No, a lot of people weren't into it. Now, something you said if you tell most VCs that it's going to take 10 years, they're not going to be very interested. And I think that's probably generally pretty true. That's a true statement. Can you talk a little bit more about your VC? Like, why are they a little different, right? I mean, because that actually, like you said, when you find the right people, it turns them on. Like, when you say that to them, does that kind of turn them on?
Yeah, I had to find early on the right match was VCs who said, if we're not doing the next multi-billion-dollar big thing, I'm not interested. And so they're throwing people out the door for things that are good ideas that will make fast money in 2 years. They're like, great, there's other funding sources for you. This is not that, right? Because they're also not going to make 1,000, 10,000x on their investment, but they need to see that happen in order to make their fund work. So everyone has different risk profiles for their fund. If it's a short fund, then they need something like a bunch of 2, 3x round rolls, then that's the right people to go to, and those people think you're absolutely crazy. But if you're trying to do something that, if you bring a 2, 3x to somebody who is looking for 10,000x, they're not interested in that. So they need to see something where the big vision is there. There's to get very technical, you'll be given top-down and bottoms-up market sizing. The right VCs, if you're looking for these big missions, you have to start with that. I did this wrong when I first pitched because I was technical. So I would lead people, it's the way you would just get a scientist there, with like the how, and then eventually the what and why it's interesting would be how I close, right? That would get scientists on board, because they'd get excited by the end, because they'd start looking ahead where I want, you could use it to do this, you could use it to do that, right? And they get excited. With VCs, it's the opposite. If you start with a conclusion, this is going to be, like, the world is going to look completely different 5, 10 years from now because of this technology. Here's how that looks, here's the size of that market, and then you work backwards from it, and here's how we make that work.
So we were introduced, just to dig in a little bit more on that, we were introduced by Steve Osqui at GigaFund. And particularly that's part of what I was referring to. I've known Steve for a long time, and his partner Luke was one of the founders of PayPal. They live here in Austin, and actually, little known fact, but Steve built out the 16th floor of Capital Factory for his, I don't know if you know this, for his company Smiley Media. You'll find some hidden smiley faces built into the 16th floor, and that's what allowed me to open Capital Factory. Is he wasn't really using it anymore, and nobody would have leased me a floor to open Capital Factory, but he did, and we opened it on the top floor, and and that's what allowed it to go start. So I've known Steve for a long time, but when Steve tells me the pitch of like what the kinds of founders they're looking to invest in, the kind of things that they get excited about, in addition to being these big world-changing opportunities, they talk about founders who this is their life's mission. Like they're not trying to go flip it and sell it. They want to work. This is like not that they have to work on it forever, but their vision is to work on this for a really long time, and it seems really well aligned with what you talked about. But they're pretty unusual like that.
Yeah, I mean, it's connected. It takes in addition to getting investors who are willing to be that patient, it means a monastic devotion from myself and some of the early employees that we care that much that like this is our whole life, this is our big pitch to the world, and so it matters more to us than money, it matters more to us than anything. That has to work out if you're going to push something that big.
Yeah, great questions.
I have two questions. One, what pain points and opportunities you are seeing in your field? And second, do you still think the PhD worth it? Because you were like talking about this story.
Do you have a PhD?
Technically, yeah. So the way that story closes is that I did technically quit. And hilariously, the graduate office tried to like not accept my resignation. They thought I was insane. They were like, if I just don't touch it, it won't be real. Like, not how this works. Here's my letter. And so I like left and went to start raising for the company. Now I didn't. This is good life advice too that I'd give myself. Never run away from something. Run towards the thing you want. And so when I left, even my PhD, I didn't say no to writing the papers that my boss said I had to write to graduate, even though I'd already written 4. You wanted 6? Cool. I'm going to write the extra 2, and I'll mail them to you, but I don't work for you anymore. That's how I closed that. And so I did at night while I was fundraising during the day, write those extra 2 papers, mail them into him. I didn't even get confirmation of receipt, but I was like, well, I did my part. So I thought I was done. While we're raising money for the company, this is like basically a whole year of, there's a whole story. We were living out of our cars back and forth trying to talk to VCs to raise money, so we were pretty devoted to making this thing happen. This is prior to Airbnb being a thing, so we were doing Hotwire at the time, which is like you get a hotel like the day of, and then you show up and you're like, hey, you have an open space, can I get it for discount? And like we're doing that at a bunch of motels bouncing around the valley for a long time. And as we're fundraising, and I've turned in my thesis, we eventually managed to get, it was Founders Fund who first like got excited about us and wanted to do the Series A with us. Now they came to us and said, okay, we're going to do the Series A at this point, and I did get a letter at that point from my old professor that was like, hey, I finally read your thesis, like you gotta give me 1 day, come back and defend. And he picks the same day we're supposed to close the Series A round with the venture capitalists, so, you know, alignment, they have to make that happen. And so I have a day where I talk to the lawyers about signing it, and I'm like, can I sign an abstention? They were like, we've literally never been asked that, what the hell are you talking about? And we're like, well, I have something very important to do. They're like, more important than this? And I was like, all right, well, can we work this out? And he said yes. And so that day I wake up and presently I have like no company because we have no money. No job. I don't technically have a permanent address. I'm living out of my car at that point. I definitely don't have the degree because I left without it. So I go in, in 1 day I do the defense, works out great, they give me the degree, we sign the Series A, so we get funded. The company immediately hires me, I fly back, and then my co-founder and I were like, let's go find an apartment. So we had a big day in that 1 day.
Life-changing.
Yeah.
Life-changing day.
On some level, it had to be that risky to even get the crazy thing to happen to begin with. Does that make sense?
You had one more?
And the first question I asked about the pinpoint opportunities right now, you're seeing like Gen AI, you're seeing tech, but what are you seeing because of like the bio cloud? So like, what are you seeing are upcoming?
Yeah, I'd say there's sort of macro pain points and then there's a bunch of small ones. The biggest ones in research is that ideas are not the limiting factor. And that was for me, the decision to go in graduate school, that was probably the most sobering part of it. I assume that must be the case because it is that way in other communities. Like it's that way in many ways in math and computer science is like, you don't need money, you need ideas. Like that's the main thing. In chemistry and biology, it's just a ton of work, like physical, actual work that has to get done. And that tends to be the rate limiting step. So in the macro pain point, that's the biggest thing that I was trying to solve is to get that to be smaller. There's 1,000 little pain points along the way that involve solving that. Dealing with like how data gets transmitted around, the fact that I still have to pitch, it cracks me up that there's still a slide that talks about how my system is paperless. Duh. Like how is that still a thing? Because in pharma that's a problem. They're still literally dealing with paper. So there's 1,000 smaller problems that have to get solved along the way that are worth thinking about. And in fact that you're asking about pain points instead of products is already a good sign that you're thinking like an entrepreneur. Because what you want to go is understand those pain points and then you figure out how to solve them in that direction rather than the other way around. Something you have that would address.
You're good.
So I was wondering, kind of going back to the whole like university partnership thing. So like you're already in talks with Carnegie Mellon, but then if you want to expand more into other universities, like I guess something that came to mind was like, oh, would you be replacing, say, like the sequencing cores and like all these other facilities at these universities? And like, I would expect there to be pushback, like some pushback, because it's like these people could potentially like lose their jobs. Maybe they'll be like retrained to do something, but it's like along with that, like what other kind of pushback do you expect to see from these sectors that you're trying to break into, I guess?
That's a very observant point for sure, that anything has automation at the heart of it or efficiency at the heart of it, you're able to do something less, means you're replacing something. And so that applies not just to university course centers, that's definitely a thing to think about, is like if you have a cloud lab, to what extent do you need the course center? I think you start to quickly separate out, course centers doing two different things. They're providing expertise and then they're providing labor. And they're super good at providing expertise and terrible at providing labor because it's very expensive and not very efficient, right? So you could easily see trying to convince them to become your customer and be like, well, no, you guys should just be using the cloud lab to run like way more mass specs. But it's like somebody has to figure out how to program the mass specs, so that'd be great. Same with all the genomic centers too, right? Like someone's got to figure out how to do all the NGS and prepare the plates and do the 10x and all the single cell stuff. And so you're just trying to give those people scale at the end of the day. But it is worth acknowledging that there is a group that's like going to get squeezed out there, right? And in our intermediate view in pharma, often it's like if you're at the level of the scientist, this is awesome for you because you're running 5 to 8 times as many experiments. If you're at the level of our operators, by the way, we're inviting people in who have never been working in labs before. It's people who are working at like Amazon Fulfillment, UPS. I poach aggressively from UPS because it's a way cooler job to be working with all this equipment and at scale and this sort of thing. You're squeezed out in the middle of like the technician role where some scientist was telling you what to do and you're kind of filling in the blanks. That sort of isn't a role anymore now that we have operators that can come in, and that's a much more logistical activity, and scientists are working at scale, right? And so it's something you have to be kind of cognizant of when you're going in that field. I'm grateful for the fact that the reason I want us very focused on biopharma and biotech is that the end mission at the end of the day of those companies, and they get a rough rap in the world, but ultimately they're trying to cure diseases. And so everyone can get over themselves over the notion of like, that's what's important to all of us. Money can't buy that in most cases. And so that has to come first. Like what gets us most gainfully employed is a second order bit to saving lives. That must come first. And so it's nice to be in that field. I think the pushback would be way wilder if like we were doing something that was like not necessary, like entertainment or something like that, where people are like, there's an argument to be made of like, there's two sides of the lifestyle. No.
Probably have time for 3 or 4 more questions.
Thank you. Do you hear me? Your idea makes me think that right now we're talking about AI. Thinking that AI can help us to code, for example, but I'm thinking about AI solving problems, so creating the experiments they need to solve a specific problem, so replacing the person that does the paper in general, so you could give AI just a prompt of a question and then they could run the necessary experiments. Have you thought about that, or how would this process work, or if it would be viable?
It's a good question, and that paper I mentioned in Science is Gabe Gomez. If you go look for his paper, you can find it. Does exactly that, and what he's using Gen AI to do, so he's just basically co-opting ChatGPT and then getting actually networks of bots to talk to each other in order to do experiment design using the cloud. And so the scientist gives a high-level prompt like, I would like to synthesize this compound. Tell me how, right? And then it goes and downloads papers and figures out the synthetic route, and then says, okay, well that's going to involve mixing a bunch of chemicals. So great, how do I do that? And then the next step of planning is like, well, how do I get the cloud lab to do that? And no kidding, it just reads our help files and then programs it, tries to make that work. I think that's a very helpful, like, initial tool. One thing nuance I've come to respect in playing around with, I use the Gen AI like every day, is at the current level of the technology, and you can see there's papers about this coming out even like months ago. When it comes to aiding programming, it's really helpful for beginners. But that starts to taper off. Like once you're a pro programmer, it's doing less and less for you because it's already natural for you. You don't even think about it when you're writing code anymore. You think about the algorithm, not the actual lines of code you write. So that part isn't difficult. And that translation from one dimension to another is what that technology is meant for. So you're translating that idea into the code is the part that it's good at. Like coming up with the notion of the algorithm is not what it's good at right now. That means there's future directions in those things. In fact, that paper that was written that's very interesting is what Gabe did that was fascinating is it has to do like a little bit more complex logic than just flat GTP can do, can't handle it. But the way he got it to do it is he has like networks of bots that talk to each other. So literally the planner says, okay, we need to do this, everybody. Go do this piece of it, hands it off to another agent that's running the Gen AI. It tries to come up with it, then the other one goes and critiques it, goes, no, that's not right, that won't work because of this. And they'll literally like argue back and forth until they get the design to work for the thing, and that's a really cool next level thing on top of it that one can build. Where that's leading, I think, for you guys to care about is the mechanical syntax of what we do day to day is going to matter less and less, and the creativity that you bring to that problem solving is going to matter much more and more, right? And you got to be, and that has a lot to do with like your engagement and excitement by those ideas. If you hear that and you're like, that's cool, I want to go build that, that's a really good sign. And this is going to be a world where like how to build it is less difficult than getting excited about what to build. That is your question?
Hello. Hey. Hey.
No. Do you need this one? Gotta get you on the podcast.
Thank you. So hi, yeah, I love your work and I love how it's able to remove the spatial and the resource constraint. So could you share one example of like a successful project that you're able to work on, either remotely for other people, and could you describe how the automation was able to improve the efficiency and quality of the work?
Great question. So like what is the value proposition from the point of view of the user at the end of the day when using this stuff? And can I give examples? It's easy on the published ones because those are like out there. Most of who I work for on a revenue basis is big pharma, big biotech companies. So I can speak about it in the abstract, so please don't get frustrated if it doesn't sound like it's, there are discrete examples, I just can't use them. But a lot of them are places where people are doing studies in things like CMC or like mid to late stage R&D, where they need to improve an existing process or study what happens as a molecule degrades, or they need to understand the sort of lifetime of even the tools they're working with to manufacture the drugs they're looking at. They need to do that at scale, and they need to try a bunch of different variants of similar experiments. And often they're not even sure what the right technique is. And so where we've seen a lot of success is in cases where there's a lot of optimization that needs to be done, you can quickly jump between machines because you're just like writing a new line of code to work with one machine versus another. Or if you're not sure how to do something. So here's a real story. You have to figure out at one step, you're trying to, you're comp bio, right? Did I hear that as a record? Okay, so you'll get this. You have to figure out how to purify a compound, right? Okay, classic problem. You could use column chromatography, you could use gels, you could use old school stuff like dialysis or process filtration, which is a more modern version of something similar. It's filter-based separation. So like you have all these options. Do you know which one's gonna work? No. And so what most people do is you try them serially one at a time. Where the research goes the fastest now is when you use a tool like this, the right researcher will get on and try all of those methods in one night. Poorly, they're gonna give a first guess at all of them. But right away they can see that some things don't work well and some things do work well. And then the next level follow-up, they'll go and they'll refine that. So some of the big successes that will cut down the research timing is when you're exploring things in parallel. It does remind me, this is how old I am, of like parallel computing was a new thing when I was learning how to code. And we're like, what happens when you have like more than one processor? What a crazy idea. Now this is normal for you guys, right? To be like, oh, I just parallelize it once, 10 machines. But thinking about problems in that way can make the research itself move faster because you're using the parallel exploration of ideas to get to where you want to go. And so those have been very successful.
Just jumping on that real quickly. A few weeks ago, Mike Maples was here, and hopefully you guys got to see him talk. Mike Maples from Floodgate, really great investor, and he just released a book, and he was talking about inflection points, and not just, it's not enough that a trend of something like incrementally getting cheaper, but there's often like an inflection point. Like right now, like the payload to space inflection point is one of those things where it's like just getting a critical point of like getting cheaper to put things in space. And it seems like an example you just gave, it's like you've just made it like potentially crossed a critical barrier where it's so much cheaper to do these experiments that now I can just do all the experiments, right? Like instead of having to wait 4 days potentially to figure out which one works, can I just run all 4 tonight and tell me the answer, right? And tomorrow I just saved 3 days. Like, it costs a little bit more, but maybe it costs me as much to run all 4 experiments as it would have to do the one before by myself. Is that a fair?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, definitely price advantage is a big thing. The other big success that I can share stories of is about the idea that you've turned the experiment itself into code, which for reproducibility is a major thing. So right now, the proper way to publish a method is to write basically the way you would write a recipe in a cookbook. And you can imagine how difficult it is. I could go, I guess you guys, I'm not a chef, but I could go buy a cookbook from like a Michelin star rated chef. No shot that on the first time in my kitchen I'm gonna get the same meal that they got, right? And we all know that. It's very difficult to reproduce even when you're just using written language to do stuff. And so that's a constant problem in industry. For FDA, it's unacceptable to have non-reproducible experiments because obviously that would be unsafe for all of us. And so the way that pharma, we were talking about pain points, deals with this is just massive amounts. It's just brute force. So it's like you build up methods that are like hundreds of pages to run something that would normally be published in like 2 paragraphs. Then you train everyone for 30 days on how to run that method specifically over and over and over again until they get really good at it. And then you have them go off and do this in a quality controlled environment where all the machines have been tested and what have you with these control experiments that you can run it. So one of the big successes we had, we did this as a proof point with the experiments where we had a big biotech company where 3 different scientists had developed a bunch of new methods. And then they took all their methods and they were running them both in the cloud lab and in the traditional lab. And they were told to take their lab notebook and hand it off to the person to their right. And so they do that. And the person to the right has to reproduce their experiment. And in the cloud lab, they all just pushed a button and got the same thing run tomorrow because it's just code at this point. So now anyone can execute it. When in the physical lab, like literally by the end of the study, which was like 3 months long, they still hadn't reproduced some of the experiments, even though they're standing next to the person who came up with that experiment. That's how difficult it is to transmit that information. So that's the kind of step change we're trying to look for.
Yeah, it's fundamentally more reliable and more reproducible, which is super important here. One more question from the students.
Hi, so I have 2 questions actually.
All right, 2.
Yeah, the first one is when you just started out, I know all these research labs, maybe even companies that you're working with, they really want to keep the results of their tests confidential and want to make sure that like everything's like just kept to themselves. So how did you ensure that data is secure in like the very early stages of your company?
Cheat code there is just use AWS for everything. So our security was all about protecting the connection to the cloud. I don't even keep, this is like a selling point to them, I don't keep local data for more than 24 hours. It lives in my Exchange servers just long enough to gather it from the machine, and then it goes immediately to the cloud, and then I delete it. So I don't even have access to it after that. So what you're really doing is I'm leading on a much bigger company that's way better at cybersecurity than I am. And then everything we focus on is like protect the pipe to AWS, right? And then of course on the side of the pharmas, it's like protect the logins, because if somebody gets a login, they now have the keys to the kingdom, right? But actually that's a pretty good pitch to the IT groups, because they're mostly worried about, hilariously, if you go to like a pharma company right now, there'll be signs up in the hallways and even in the bathrooms and some of them, they're like, do not use thumb drives. Stop emailing each other data. Like, this is not a secure channel. Like, use the proper channels. Yeah. So just trying to get that stuff organized into one point.
So another benefit would be that they might actually prefer that they use your solution because it's safer and more secure.
Yeah, it's like one attack vector to protect is way better than having, you can imagine, you built this like perfect security system and someone's just literally going to email a file to somebody else and be like, oh, great, thanks, that was very secure. So.
Yeah, thank you. And my second question kind of goes more into the symbolic language that you all use at your labs and that the users use. And I was just looking up online that you guys actually open sourced it a few years back. And I was curious about what was your motivation behind that?
Good question. I had watched a series of attempts to try to standardize APIs on lab instruments fail over and over and over again. And what I came to realize is that the players behind this, which are the instrumentation companies, were not actually motivated to make that happen, even though they would say publicly they were. I learned about the New Jersey Mafia, which is the instrumentation companies that work together, and how they really don't want their stuff commoditized. If there's an API, that means somebody else can get access to the same machine, and then it becomes generic with their competitors' machines, so they don't like that. I quickly realized too that there's like 10,000 academic initiatives to try to make a standard language for stuff, and that I had a friend at Stanford who was making a meta ontology that connected everybody else's ontology. It was like a Tower of Babel to get all the conversions together. And I remember talking to him 5 years into when we started to now, And he was so excited about this notion. He's like, I'm going to solve everything by getting all this translation layer. 5 years later, he was like completely defeated. He's like, it's growing faster than I could keep up with. There's too many different. So it's I don't know if you guys have ever read XKCD, but there's a comic in there of like, it's the same as like, there's no standard. Why is there no standard? I know, let's make another standard. So it's like the 10,000 standard. When we open sourced SLL, the notion was, I think similar to like the way PDF came about, is like, you know what's going to actually win this fight is like if your thing is actionable. So because we had a product out there that someone could push a button and run that code, that's the most important thing to make it standard. But then I'm realizing that I can't really own that if this is going to be a universal language. It needs to be shared amongst everyone, and my competitive advantage is going to be those fulfillment centers being crazy efficient and the technology inside those centers to make them work, rather than the description of the experiment itself has to sort of belong to everybody to make sense.
All right, I have 2 more questions to close us out. First one for me is, there's so much talk about being on this, like going way back to Diamantes and like, the kind of escape velocity of when do we hit the point where we're adding to the human life is, more than a year per year so that you're effectively going to live forever. I heard someone recently claim on X that he was like, don't leave your house for 3 years. Don't smoke, don't try anything, don't do anything risky, because if you make it 3 more years, you're gonna live forever. Where do you think we are in that spectrum? Just because you might have, not that you're in you're in it closer than most other people. Like,
I think we have I think the reason I'm most excited about, and still the thing that speaks to my heart, and the thing that I'm willing to sacrifice and put everything into what we have done, is that there is, people say this when they're like, oh, you put a man on the moon, but you still don't have a cure to cancer. This is literally what we're working on, is building the machine that everyone should be using to cure cancer. And so I can't imagine a thing to get more behind. And there are so many problems. It's weird to work in a field where there's vertical demand. You don't, when you're pitching biotechs, by the way, pro tip, you don't have to go to a VC and tell them why it's important to cure cancer. They know, right? They're like, how? And if you can tell me how, then I want in, right? Because everyone understands it's valuable. That's very rare. There aren't a lot of other fields. Most of the time you're going to be pitching. Half your pitch is like why you're even caring about this problem, why it's worth solving, right? Medicine looks different, and there's a million things that we need to solve that will add up to stuff like we all live longer and longer and longer. At the end of the day, that I don't know that there'll be any one thing that leads to some huge breakthrough, because
So it's not AI.
It's going to be part of that, for sure. I think that those will become part of the everyday tools. It's like saying, will the internet be involved, right, in 2000? Yes, obviously.
It will use electricity.
Yeah, it'll be like inherent to everything we do, and the same thing will be true with AI too.
All right, last question. Imagine yourself back in undergrad, college, thinking about starting a company, thinking about your future, sitting in the seat that they're all sitting in now. What would you tell yourself? What advice?
So I'm going back to like undergrad, right before going to grad school.
Most of these are undergrad students.
Okay, so your guys' age. I'll give the advice my brother gave me on the first day of college. So he was older than me, older brother, and he was already at Stanford for 3 years when I was going to school. And I was pestering him for a ton of advice. I'm like, what's it going to be like? What do I need to do? What do I need to prepare? I was obviously a very nerdy kid, if that hasn't come across by now. And he sort of thinks about it for a while, and he leans back and he says, bring shower shoes. The like flip-flops, it's shared bathrooms. He's like, that'll get you past the first day. You'll figure out the rest from there. And that was the only advice he ever gave me, and it was perfect.
All right, bring shower shoes.
Bring shower shoes, yes.
All right, well, thank you so much, Brian. As I say every week, but it's always important to say again, I know you have a lot of things you could be doing this afternoon. You've got a company or two you could be running and should be running, and probably other personal things you could be doing. So it really means a lot for you to come spend this time with us, and thank you. We really appreciate it. I think it was super interesting. As I mentioned before, next week we are going to have all the different student orgs here pitching. That would be one, we're still going to do our pitches. So that would be a great one for actually anyone else who's interested in entrepreneurship to come to from UT to learn more about all the different resources available and to get to pitch in front of all the other orgs. So really good opportunity next week to come in. And What? Invite your friends, and let's get a selfie with Brian and wrap this up.
Thanks, everybody.
Sorry, come on in.
Hey guys, we have books on the back table, free for all of you to take, so definitely go back there and grab a copy. That'd be awesome. Grab attendance, grab attendance, grab attendance, sorry. Thank you for that reminder. Amber also has parking validation if you need it.
That was honestly probably shit. If I should run from I got shit down. Cannot lie. Huh? What? How stuff? How stuff? Stuff and stuff. Got a lot of stuff to. Got a lot of stuff to stuff. Cannot lie. That's probably my biggest problem with stuff. I would say more discipline on myself for accomplishing tangible results from stuff. Oh yeah. I.e., accomplishing stuff from stuff. I would say. Bro. Fuck. That's so like that's how you know it's gonna be. Hot hell. That was loud. Yeah. That was loud.
Like that's how fast AI is. In fact, that fighting tooth and nail for children.
Just working on stuff. That was awkward. That was sad, bro. A whole range of emotions. The book distracted me. I picked up on first.
Fight with everyone is the same. Most of them is like fighting with every machine to make your software live in there. The other thing I learned is like those companies, they make money from the world of machines. No motivation. First part.
You get out of it, or you kind of like what you got here.
Oh, also another thing, if you're competing with companies that are public, you can go look up their stock. Go see where they stand.
Well, there's this
I thought I
believe that he's got $100. I got more than 3. No, we have more than that.
That's actually small.
Yeah, dude, I was like, bro, I have to say, I guess
yeah, I decided to clean up. My wardrobe because, bro, I saw like I showed up. My shirt was right there. And one of the judges was like, bro, I've never seen someone so fucking casual. And so I was like, alright, you know what? I'm gonna start like actually like wearing shoes during the day.
I've heard too many people right now.
No, bro, that also really too. Yeah.
They're coming back.
Huh?
You said they're coming back.
Yeah. No, I did see them for like 18 grand last week.
Oh, okay. Oh, yeah.
I think it was like they were waiting on like to see how I could on Thursday, and then Thursday I just like utterly fucking lost. Like the worst like public event that I've ever done in my life. Like,
Did you prepare or did you just
no, the problem is yeah, so I prepared a whole presentation, but then they said to do it, so then I redid the entire thing and I submitted it like right before, so I didn't even have time to like run through it. By the time it was fucked up, I don't know who was looking for. You're learning the startup lab.
It was actually a really good intro, bro. You just got ran. You just had to smooth it out.
Yeah. I was like, I also like blanked on like.
I know exactly how you feel for something.
But it's like.
Engagement goes.
Yeah.
As soon as you started standing over there, like I knew something was up. I knew it was gonna be good. It was like. I had to run up. Like,
I even got the dog punch on. I was like,
that was that literally was hilarious, bro.
Oh my god. It was like kind of threw that also threw me off a little bit. I was like,
yeah, I bet.
But like, I have like my only thing is like I don't know when I can even like actually start building this because like if I actually not that I wouldn't want to, but it's like I kind of want to focus on like other things first. I did get a talk with like there's like a biomechanics lab at UT. And it's like
honestly, can you sell the idea? It's like your whole thing called constellation. Part of the API is just what kind of how should I pitch the story work? They all go in like basic. Okay.
So these are actually I mean some people do use them.
There's 10,000 things in it, and they're all banned. There's no content on them.
It takes a bit to get used to.
I tried to use their stuff.
Yeah.
Validations here while
I'm good.
Reach out when you're pitched today.
Sorry about like the.
No, don't apologize. I think it takes a lot of guys.
Oh yeah, you have balls to get up there.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. If I can actually get them in.
You gotta mess with it. First customer. First customer. I feel like that was
it's like no, like I talked to some people and it's like definitely you want like a thick sole, but like the problem is you want thick soles but like still maintain like flexibility in the shoe. You still want like a wider toe box, like I mean something like shaped similar to this probably. It does get you need to get used to walking these because like most people are used to because most shoes have like a really thick sole and you get used to like stepping with their heels. So like if you do that with this, I mean you're gonna like feel it maybe like an hour, maybe even less. You try to like
those are great. Really more liquid like stuff. So instead of going like this, you want to like kind of
like
flat.
rolling your
Not
foot.
roll. Yeah, no, because like you're just gonna do like you're gonna hurt your heels like.
Yeah, because whenever I don't wear like super comfy shoes, my feet hurt.
Yeah, so like it does force you to like kind of change the way you walk a little bit, but like with parkour shoes, it's like you need them to like really resist a lot of wear and tear, and so it's like that's why you want like a really thick, really thick soles.
Should it be like the sole heavy in the front? Because you're like under your toes and stuff.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, a lot of the impact's gonna be on the front of it, so it's like, but you still want to maintain like balance. But it's like, it is an interesting challenge. Actually, parkour shoe. But I think where I want to also like kind of go with is like the sustainability like aspect of like use like all natural materials. Like you can maybe so like with these, I was going to try to bring up like this company, they have a program where they refurbish the shoe. If you send it to them, they can kind of repair it or refurbish it, and then they also sell it for cheaper. So like you can get a discount on the shoe. So I'm like, okay, something like that, or just completely like recycle the material and use it just like you have a not constant supply material, but like it's gonna be cheaper to use in the long run. Because I was looking it up like right before coming, and I was like, oh, there's 23 billion pairs of shoes that are made like every year, like 22 billion end up in landfills. So it's like you can probably get some people and just like, oh yeah, no, like you can get cheaper shoes, two, like, you do it like if like the lofty, like, oh, you're doing your part to like help, and I think it's also like way more. I mean, it's way more accessible too. Because like, I mean, basketball, right? There's only gonna be,
the payment.
I mean, true.